Chapter 1908 Contemplating Mortality. Eventually, Sunny dismissed Saint to let her continue her recovery in the dark silence of his soul. Able to see once again, he looked around and pondered what he had learned. Saint seemed to have gained several new powers. One was to summon a pool of elemental darkness, one was to turn into a torrent of it, one was to manifest a suit of armor, and the last two had to do with reducing her weight and size. However, Sunny was not sure if these were truly new attributes and abilities, or simply evolutions of those she had already possessed. The suit of armor forged from pure darkness, for example, was a logical extension of her Blade of Darkness ability. The power to summon a flood of elemental darkness might have been simply the result of her Heart of Darkness growing stronger. Sunny was not sure. More than that, he did not even know if these new powers Saint had shown him were the full extent of her change. Neither did he know how many shadow fragments she had received after absorbing her old suit of onyx armor. She definitely seemed stronger. Her presence had grown deeper, the cold crimson flames burning in her eyes had become fiercer. Even though Saint had not evolved to a new class, it felt as if she was much closer to becoming a tyrant now. The problem was that Sunny had no way of knowing the details of what had changed about her. His handy bracelet imitated the shimmering runes, but what they read came from Sunny's own head. Not the omniscient reservoir of knowledge that the spell possessed. So, there was only one way for him to fully understand Saint's new powers. It was to ask Cassie to take a good look at her. However, doing that was a problem in and of itself. That was because Sunny had been unable to contact Cassie from the moment Revel and her sisters ambushed the Saints of the Sword Domain, or maybe even from before that. Since he had not spoken to her for some time prior to the ambush. As soon as Sunny discovered that he could not hear Cassie, his incarnation in the war camp of the Sword Army had been searching for her. But Master Sunless did not manage to find the blind seer yet. Looking at the subterranean lake through the smoke, Sunny sighed. I wonder what she's up to. The smoke was irritating, so Sunny turned into a shadow and glided to the edges of the smoldering ruin, where the air was cleaner. Taking a deep breath, he looked at the water. The dim darkness of the hollows was illuminated by the orange glow of the towering pyre, and dancing flames reflected on the surface of the lake. It was quiet and pretty, a soothing scene after the violent fury of the recent battle. Looking at it, Sunny felt that an emotion he had been suppressing ever since the Daughters of Ki Song retreated finally broke free. A tide of dark, terrifying fury escaped from its cage and flooded his heart. Black Moon, Princess Moonveil, or whatever her name was, had almost killed Nephi's today. While Sunny was having fun learning new things and testing his limits against Revel, Neph had been bleeding somewhere far above, alone and robbed of her powers. He couldn't quite make sense of it all. Nephis was Nephis. Her public image was that of a larger-than-life heroine, and although Sunny knew that it had been meticulously crafted by the government and Cassie, he still couldn't help but forget that she was a mere mortal. Sometimes she had accomplished the impossible too many times, just like he had, and had overcome impossible odds on too many occasions. In addition to that, her aspect made her nearly immortal. So, Sunny did not often contemplate the possibility that Nephis would be killed. Even when imagining how he himself would fight someone with powers similar to hers, he never thought about slaying them. That would be just a senseless waste of time and energy. Instead, he carefully considered how he would restrain the opponent and render them helpless, which was the optimal way of defeating such a foe. But today, that subconscious bias of his had been shattered. Each aspect was unique, and there were all kinds of them out there. Even such an insidious power as the ability to nullify all other powers existed, wielded by one of the princesses of the Song Domain, and Moonveil had used that power of hers against Nephis. Sunny did not even know how close he had come to losing her, and he was not all right with that fact. His hands turned into fists without him noticing. For a moment, Sunny contemplated using his incarnation in the camp of the Song Army to go on a slaughter. He was currently not too far from Sishan and Deathsinger. Maybe killing them would be enough punishment for Clan Song, who had dared to lay a hand on Nephi's. If not, it could at least make him feel better. However, he quickly discarded that idea. Not only would it put Rain in danger, but he couldn't really kill saints for personal reasons. Perhaps playing a valor soldier had gotten into his head, a little. For a moment, Sunny forgot that the great Clan Song was not his enemy. Its queen was, as well as the King of Swords. Everyone else was a precious resource that could not be wasted. With every saint that perished in the senseless war between the two domains, the future of humanity was being compromised. Every powerful awakened that died in Godgrave would not be able to save countless lives in the dire, inevitable future. Sunny let out a frustrated sigh. Most of all, that impulse of his was childish. He was letting his emotions get the best of him. He was being foolish. Of course, Nephis could die. No matter how impossible it seemed, she could be killed just like the rest of them. He had always understood that logically, but understanding and acceptance were two different things. Sunny could be killed despite his miraculous tenacity, as well. 0 or worse, captured alive. Remembering the dark mirror cell where Mordred had been kept for many years made him shudder. That was not something he wished for himself, or for Nephis. Just as he thought about her, the weak flames around him were suddenly extinguished, and she emerged from the smoke, shielding her face with a hand. There you are. Sunny studied her for a while, as if making sure that she was really alive, and then smiled faintly behind the mask. Yes. Here I am. Chapter 1909. Feel alive. Nephis walked over to the edge of the water, looked at it for a few moments, and then sat on the ground. Her voice sounded a little raspy, but mostly just as it always did. He has regained consciousness and is binding the gateway now. Revel's imprint is strong, so it will take some time, 10 minutes at least. Maybe half an hour. She sighed. Some of us will have to return to the waking world after that, to bring back the initial reinforcements. You know what happens next. Sunny did know. Once the gateway was bound by a saint of the Sword Army, Endel's domain would manifest in the hollows. The King of Swords would probably arrive at the ruined citadel himself, and the war would finally spill beneath the surface of the ancient bones. The subjugation of the hollows was bound to be an affair both spectacular and harrowing. Considering how powerful the predators of the ancient jungle were, the king would have to lead the conquest personally. At least for a while. By the time the immediate area around the lake was conquered by the Sword Army, both sides would have prominently established themselves in Godgrave. The first stage of the war would be complete, and the two armies would start clashing in large-scale battles, clamoring for control. Control over the surface, control over the hollows, control over the paths to the remaining two citadels. Everything that had happened before was merely a prelude, and the true bloodshed would begin now. Well, there were 10 more minutes before that happened, at least. Nephis sighed and looked down at her blackened, shredded armor. Then, she dismissed it and summoned a soft white tunic instead. Her voice sounded a little gloomy. You know, I think I am going to give up on wearing armor altogether. What is the point, if it only ends up being destroyed? Or worse, a burden. Especially these suits of full plate that Knights of Valor prefer. In the last battle, the left elbow joint was bent almost immediately. I had to struggle every time I needed to bend my arm. A faint smile appeared on her face. I think it will be great, less burden, more mobility, wider field of view. Not to mention the heat. Everyone still cooking inside a steel armor will be green with envy, looking at my ventilated self. Sunny gave her a long stare, not at all happy at the thought of people staring at Neff's ventilated body, and unhappy for another reason too. If it wasn't for your armor, it would have been your arm being cut instead of an elbow joint being bent. Nephis shrugged nonchalantly. I can heal my arm. I can't repair a broken piece of armor. He frowned. Only this time you couldn't. She did not respond, looking at the water with a hint of wistfulness in her gaze. After a while, Sunny sighed. The facade of arrogant coldness the Lord of Shadows usually wore slipped a little, and he said in a more humane tone, "It must have been hard, fighting against an overwhelming enemy without your powers. I had my shadows with me, at least. You were alone." Nephi's lingered for a few moments, then slowly shook her head. "Actually, it was nice." Her gaze grew distant. "I almost forgot what it felt like, to hold a sword without the promise of pain. I loved swordsmanship once, you know? That is because I don't have many memories of my father, and in those that I do, he is teaching me how to hold a sword. So, even after he was gone, training made me feel a connection to him." She looked at the water. "But I don't love it anymore. Wielding a sword has become simply something that I do, because it is one of the tools at my disposal, the sharpest of them, perhaps. In fact, I don't know if there's anything left that I love." Sunny remained silent, but his face fell a little behind the mask. Ouch! He knew that Neff's feelings for him were more shallow than his feelings for her were. After all, from her perspective, they had only known each other for a few months. But it still wasn't very pleasant to hear his supposed girlfriend say something like that. Oblivious to his bitterness, Nephi sighed. "Sometimes I wonder what my grandmother would have thought if she saw me now. Would she have been proud? Or heartbroken? Is this what she wanted for me? Probably not. I doubt it." Sunny sat beside her, then turned and looked at her through the dark chasms of his mask's eyes. His voice sounded a little hesitant. "From what I know, she would have been happy that you are alive. She would say, 'Good job staying alive, my dear.' Well, or something like that. In any case, you are your own person. Your grandmother could not know the burden you carry and the scars that remain on your heart. She could not understand the choices you make, or why you make them. No one is better qualified to know these things than you are, so no one has the right to critique your decisions. Don't worry about it." Gods knew, the same held true for Sunny. Both of his parents had been menial workers. He doubted that they would have had a lot of insight into the life of a saint, let alone one as exceptional as Sunny was. Their mundane lives had been far away from the matters of gods, demons, supreme tyrants, and world-ending wars. But they would have been happy to know that both he and Rain were alive and healthy. That they were forging their own path in life, despite how hard and unforgiving the world was. That they had not been bent and misshapen by its cold cruelty. Nephi looked at him, remained silent for a few moments, and said evenly, "Your mask has a crack in it." Sunny blinked. "Right?" It had cracked during the battle against Revel. The enchantment still functioned, but with Anvil potentially arriving in a matter of minutes, it was better to dismiss, "Definitely not me," and down the real deal. He sighed and dismissed the damaged memory, summoning Weaver's mask instead. However, soon after the first mask dissolved into nothingness and before the second one manifested itself into reality, Nephi suddenly placed a hand on the back of Sunny's neck, pulled him closer, and kissed him. He froze for a moment, then hurriedly dismissed the manifesting divine memory and responded to her passionate kiss. The softness of her lips, the heat of her skin, were intoxicating. They quenched a thirst that he had not known he was suffering from, and at the same time ignited a fire within him that was much more scorching than the flames devouring the ruins of the fallen citadel around them. Dazed and enraptured, Sunny quietly cursed the onyx mantle for preventing him from feeling the warm, supple fullness of her embrace. Their fervent kiss lasted for a long time. Nephi only drew away when both of them were on the verge of running out of air. Breathing heavily, they remained silent for a few moments. Sunny touched his lips, blinked a couple of times, then asked in an unexpectedly shy tone, What was that for?" She turned away with a slight smile and shrugged. I thought I would die, for a few moments back there. So, I suddenly wanted to feel alive." He remained silent for a bit. "So, do you feel alive now?" Nephi considered his question seriously, then looked at him with a solemn expression. I'd say I'm about halfway revived. His eyes glistened. Before too long, both of them felt an imperceptible shift in the air. It was as if an invisible, but palpable presence settled over the area, changing it subtly, at the same time, irrevocably. Making it colder, sharper, and heavier with solid intent. The sword domain had descended into the hollows. Chapter 1910 Rivergate. Rivergate, the citadel of Clan Dagonet, was built on a wide river. It cut across it like a great wall, or rather, a series of walls, descending from tall cliffs like steps meant for a giant. It was both a dam and a lock. The highest wall held back the powerful current. Each step below it was separated by a vast chamber with towering gates, which could be filled with or drained of water with the help of ancient enchantments. A ship traveling to or from the storm sea could descend from the cliffs or scale them due to the ancient system of locks, never leaving the river. At the same time, nothing could swim further upstream without destroying the citadel, and even then, the assailant would have to crawl out of the water and travel by land with the locks destroyed. There was almost a kilometer of vertical distance between the highest point of Rivergate and its lowest point. Each descending wall was incredibly tall and thick, built of monolithic stone, with battlements constructed on top of it. Fearsome siege weapons stood on the battlements, some of them enchanted with ancient sorcery, some built by the forge masters of Clan Valor. Hundreds of awakened crowded the walls, led by a dozen masters. 7 saints were standing on the highest of the fortress walls, looking down with somber expressions. They were Morgan, the Princess of War, and 6 champions whose help she had enlisted, or chorused. At this point, there was little difference. 3 of the 6 saints had belonged to the House of Night once, Saint Neve, Saint Bloodwave, and Saint Ether. The other 3 were with the government, Nightsinger, War Beast, and Soul Reaper. At that moment, Neve was talking to War Beast, Saint Athena, raised by wolves. So you encountered that fiend before? She gave him a long look, then smiled wryly. We even killed him before. Neve turned to a startlingly beautiful man with auburn hair and mesmerizing green eyes, a stunned expression on his face. Saint Nightingale, is this true? Saint Kai shifted uncomfortably. Not exactly. What we killed was not that fiend, rather, it was a corrupted version of his transcendent self conjured by the nightmare. Even then, none of us 3 dare claim any credit. He was eradicated by Lady Changing Star. He sighed. Still, we know more about what he's capable of than anyone else. That should be of some help. Neve looked down, then cast a dark gaze south. At least we know that he can be killed then. Less than a day had passed since Mordred of nowhere, really, had landed on the shore of the Sword Domain. The 6 saints Morgan had recruited barely had any time to talk while being brought to Rivergate by her. The journey from Bastion to here had been swift due to the fact that there were 3 transcendent champions of the House of Night with them. Morgan herself had not said much to them, spending most of the journey thinking about her task with a dark expression on her face. She had, however, given each of the 6 saints an amulet in the shape of an anvil pierced by a sword, all except Nightingale, who already possessed one. Her expression had been solemn while entrusting her companions with the steel charms. At the moment, there are only 7 of these in existence. Now 6 of them are here. I spoiled quite a few relationships to take them away from the previous owners. So, treasure them well. Never part with the amulet, and don't allow that man to take it away from you. Unless you want to become one of his vessels. Saint Neve studied the amulet with a mournful expression. After a while, he asked, Don't you have one for yourself, Lady Morgan? She shook her head. The 7th had been lost in Antarctica and never recovered. My uncle wore it. Of course, Clan Valor possesses other means of defense against that man, but none are quite as easily transportable. In any case, don't worry. I'll be fine. Hearing her words, Soul Reaper raised an eyebrow. Oh? How so? Morgan answered her with a sharp smile. Well, if he does enter my soul, I'll just have to kill him there, won't I? Like my dear sister did in the nightmare. She had been preparing to fight her brother again for 4 years. Morgan doubted that he would actually dare challenge her to a soul duel, but if he did, both of them would not survive the battle this time. Morgan almost hoped that he would die. In fact, the amulets were a bad solution to their predicament. That was because, from everything her family had learned about that man, the only way to kill him was to destroy his true reflection during a soul duel. Even that had only been learned from Changing Star's report on the events of her third nightmare. So, by donning the amulets, her champions were rejecting the only method of defeating the enemy. But little could be done about that. Leaving them defenseless was too great of a risk. She absolutely could not allow her brother to take more saints, because he would be able to conquer more citadels by wearing their bodies. And losing more citadels to the Song domain was not an option, she sighed. How long before he comes? It was Saint Bloodwave, with his deep voice, who had asked the question. Morgan lingered for a moment. He had already come. He's just hiding and observing us, for the time being. Her words seemed to unsettle the 6 saints, or rather, 5 of them. Soul Reaper remained relaxed and aloof, leaning on her ghostly war scythe as she lazily studied the ancient walls of Rivergate. Raised by Wolves shifted from one leg to another, and then looked at Morgan with a smile. You know what they usually do in such situations in heroic novels, don't you? Morgan couldn't help but admit that she was continuously perplexed by that woman. She blinked a couple of times, trying to remember if she had even read a heroic novel in her life. Surely not. Can't say that I do, Saint Athena. The tall woman, beautiful as a statue of the goddess of war that had come alive, grinned. Well, the resourceful type of hero always blows up a dam and drowns an army of 10,000 men, achieving an impossible victory and proving their strategic genius. You're the strategist, so we aren't going to blow up Rivergate, are we? Oh, and call me Effie. Morgan stared at her for a few moments, then slowly shook her head. No, we are not going to blow up Rivergate. Why would I try drowning an enemy whose vessels are all saints from the House of Night? That doesn't make any sense. Raised by Wolves. Effie nodded knowingly. A good decision. You really are a genius.